Okay then, here we go with our second episode of today and the review of Mea Maxima Culpa, Silence in the House of the Lord, which is a new documentary charting the horrific acts that were formed by, ostensibly it's the acts of a single Catholic priest in a school in America, in which he, over the course of a number of years, abused a number of deaf students. But it brings itself out into a wider encompassing role after this, in terms of looking at the entire Catholic Church and this current slew and spate of accusations of child abuse from within the Church. I must say, I'm not usually a massive fan of documentaries. And that was until last year when I watched an amazing film that I keep, as I know, banging on about, called Nostalgia for the Light, which was set in Chile's Atacama Desert. And it was at that point that I realised that documentary filmmaking can be just as beautiful, just as informative as any fictional account can be. So this is, I think, what's given Mea Maxima Culpa a bigger audience, perhaps, and a bigger scope, is obviously with the recent resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. Because this film, a lot of it deals with the time in which he was just Cardinal Ratzinger, and there is an accusation that basically Ratzinger asked to have every case of child abuse passed across his desk. So the argument is that the current Pope knew full well about these things that were happening within the Church, but just chose not to act. And there is a school of thought that says this is the reason why he's now resigned, because he will be brought under intense pressure by the Vatican and from sources outside to try and release documents from within Vatican libraries to expose exactly how much he knew. It also accuses Pope John Paul II of willful knowledge this was going on, but that he actively blocked any information coming out about it. So, the way the film is put together is we see four now grown men who were all at this St John's School for the Deaf over a number of years. They've now grown up, but all four of them are linked by the fact that they were abused by the same priest. And what makes it all the more heartbreaking is that these were children whose parents and families were unable to sign. So their only point of contact with families was through this priest, who was not deaf, but he could sign. So the point was that there was no way that he could ever tell the families the truth of what was happening, because there was no physical way for them to communicate between each other, because the families didn't know how to sign, and obviously the deaf boys didn't know how to speak. So it's done in a kind of strange way, in that each of the four main characters here has their signs are being spoken. And I think it's possibly one of the real downsides of an otherwise pretty damn good film, is that the people who are doing the speaking for them and interpreting the signs, they're the likes of John Slattery and Ethan Hawke. And it just seems a bit weird to be having a story of this gravity and brevity being told, and yet we're listening to these words being read out by professional actors, as opposed to either unknown actors or potentially subtitles. I think that may have been a slightly better way to go with it than the way they have. But it's a really, really minor complaint of what is otherwise a pretty damn good film, because we learn of the abuse performed by this priest, and of their attempts for justice, because ultimately they go to the Archbishop, who literally just completely ignores them. I mean, at one point we see scrolling across the screen the levels within the Catholic Church. So you've got priest, Monsignor, Bishop, Archbishop, Cardinal, Pope. And the implication is that each of these layers, they're trying to get this guy exposed, but each of the layers are blocking them. And ultimately they get as far as the Archbishop, and they start writing to cardinals and things. And the implication obviously is that this would have hit the desk of Joseph Ratzinger at some point, and so by definition, the Pope at the present time must have known about this going on. So within this community, eventually they start, when they don't get the replies they want from the church, they start producing their own sort of wanted posters and hand them out around the community and trying to basically hound this priest out of his profession to try and get him away from the children that he's abusing. What unfortunately happens is one of the boys tries to start a lawsuit against the priest, and what ultimately happens is that no one's entirely sure what was said, but eventually a document was signed by the boy apologising and saying that it was all completely untrue, and that he apologised profusely for any upset he caused the priest. The implication basically is that he didn't really understand what it was he was signing to say that this was happening, and certainly there's no implication that the priest was ever innocent. There are enough people who've now come forward that we know that he was not an innocent priest. Ultimately, the Vatican has the priest removed and placed somewhere else. But this is the overarching theme of the entire film, is that the issue is that we're not dealing here with any kind of chastisement. There's, at no point does the Catholic Church ever apologise for what it's doing. The implication is always, it's quite sad that a priest has transgressed, but there's no act of apology. One of the more stunning moments in the entire film comes later on when they move the view of the film over into Ireland and the abuses there, and they have a brilliant piece of archived footage of, I think it's the Bishop of Dublin is brought in to ask him why, when he knew these seedy priests were abusing children, why didn't he, after it came out, at least go and apologise to families. And you see this aging priest, very, very moist-eyed, and his response is, I guess I should have, but I have so much on. And it's staggeringly incompetent as a reply. You're thinking, your priest has abused these children, and your response is, you can't apologise because you have too much on. It's staggering in its incompetence. And this is what the film does really, really well. It's set pieces like that. I think what the church would say is they're not really having an opportunity here to respond. But the issue they have is that the Catholic Church is basically so much of an enclosed fortress. At times there are even shots of St. Peter's Square showing just how enclosed the Vatican is. It's like something at the Kremlin. It's with these huge high walls that you can't transgress across. And the idea is that they refuse to ever chastise their priests. And what they bring in at one point is we see someone whose job was basically for years and years and years to be a firefighter for this kind of thing. And he was employed by the Catholic Church and given this huge pot of money. And his job was to go around the country to where these priests were doing their abusing, remove the priest from that congregation, put them somewhere else, and pay off the victims. And there's the amounts of money that are being involved here every year to bankroll this are staggering. And it's one thing the film does really, really well. is expose this kind of thing, that the Catholic Church must know it's going on, because they spend so much money trying to cover it up. And the point is that nobody ever gets defrocked. This is the entire point, is that these priests simply moved elsewhere. There's even talk at one point, and the evidence is there, to show that the Catholic Church was actually trying to buy an island on which to place all these priests that have been defrocked. They even put a down payment on an island in the Caribbean, and we've got documents from the actual papacy to say, please stop the purchase of this island, we're not going to do it. So it's really intriguing to see all the ways that the Church is desperately trying to pretend and to protect its own. Because it's sort of like anyone who's ever watched sort of footage of ancient Roman soldiers forming sort of their tortoise shell, in which they link all their shields together and they poke spears through all the gaps, and so it's one bristling shell that there's no way an enemy can get through. That's pretty much how the Catholic Church is portrayed here, as basically creating this shell over itself that you can't permeate, and it will deal with its own things internally. One of the more damning things within it is the idea that the Catholic Church is somehow declared the Vatican is classed as a nation state, and which is why we can't prosecute against the Vatican in this way. And what they raise up is, why should the Vatican have this status as a state beyond itself? Because no one lives there, there are no Vaticanians. It's not in any way an actual real country state, and yet purely because Mussolini agreed to make it so, we can't prosecute them. And this is the whole point of the film, is that it's desperate attempts of certain lawyers to try and sue the Vatican. You could say the lawyers themselves probably don't have the best interests of their clients at heart. They are just there to basically make money, because that's what they're there to do. They are lawyers after all. And they aren't doing this through any altruistic action. But I don't think it really matters. Certainly not to me, because ultimately we need to have these lawyers who are getting involved to actually bring these cases to light. And, ultimately, what happens is our original priest from America, he passes away without ever facing up to his actions. And there were reporters, I think, in a few papers around America, who started picking up these stories and running with them. And you see them facing off against their opponents, who are commentators on behalf of the Vatican or the Church, saying how this is completely either untrue or that the Vatican didn't know about it. And that really gives us two options, which is either the Vatican doesn't know what's happening within its own church, or, as is more likely, the Vatican structures are blocking it. Because one of the journalists said that she thought, originally, this was just an American thing. It's clearly American priests, and the Vatican is not at fault for this. But as soon as it starts spreading across Europe and across the world, they come to realise that actually, no, this goes right to the very, very heart of Vatican. And that's where the documentary goes. It goes to St. Peter's Square and gives us profiles of John Paul II and Benedict XVI. And it implies that there is no way possibly they couldn't have known. It points out that there are child abusers right at the very, very top of the Vatican structure. It explains that Pope John Paul II's right-hand man is certainly accused of being a child molester in these ways. And it's very, very powerfully done. It's certainly not an easy watch, because obviously in terms of the actual material itself and what it's talking about, it was never going to be an easy watch. But what it always is endlessly fascinating. And I think particularly you put it now in the context of the current news of Benedict XVI retiring from his role of Pope, how much of that is going to be down to the fact that this film is out there now and that this storyline isn't going away. We see just in today's news, there's more talk about another senior cardinal being involved in these scandals. So it's not something that's going away, and I don't think, realistically, Benedict XVI could possibly have controlled that, because we all know that as a Cardinal Ratzinger, all this information was passed across his desk and he's done nothing about it. You could say perhaps John Paul II didn't know about it, but the fact is, the current Pope, there is no way he couldn't know about it, because we know that he asked for all these cases to get passed over his desk. And it's a scorching and damning indictment. Because there's some suggestions that is there an awful lot really the Pope can do? But the other indictment would be, he's the Pope, he must be able to do something about it. He is the head of the Catholic Church. He surely must be able to truly root out what is going on here and defrock those involved, because that's the point of the whole film, is that this original priest, he never ever faced justice for what he'd done, and he effectively scarred these boys for life with his brutal actions, and yet he never faced up to any kind of justice, retribution for what it was that he'd done. I mean, I would say as a film, it's probably not going to get a hugely wide playing, but I would say if you do get a chance to watch it, and this is the kind of thing you're interested in, as in documentaries about what's happening within the Catholic Church, it's a really, really well-made piece of work. I'm not sure it's really a film for everyone, but as I say, it's never an easy watch, but what it is constantly engrossing. And you will be shocked at the levels to which the Catholic Church is prepared to take steps to try and stop this thing getting out. And the point is, every time these things come out, it's never contrition expressed at the victim. It's always contrition that it's a priest who's strayed. It's never an apology to the family. It's always, oh, they've not really understood their priestly role. And the point is, there's a disconnect there. Because, yes, they're moving the priests away to elsewhere, but the priest isn't facing any kind of discipline. They aren't being defrocked. And the point is that at no point is the Catholic Church coming out and saying to the victims, we are sorry that this has happened on our watch. And that's the most burning indictment of the whole film. I mean, it is a really, really film that's really worth going to see if you get a chance. Whether or not come the end of the year it'll be in my top 10, I'm not sure, but I would say it certainly was an exceptionally interesting way to spend a few hours of my time. If you get a chance, I would say to you, just catch that out, and I'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.